Hey everybody, Happy New Year. Welcome back to a word from our sponsor. It is week 2.5 of the new year. My guess is that some of you have failed in your New Year's resolutions. And I have good news for you. Our sponsor is in the business of restoration and restoring. You don't need a New Year's resolution. You need a New Year's transformation. And he is willing to give a new heart to every person who signs up and follows him. New heart this year, new you. This is a limited offer, according to our Calvinist friends. Only a limited number of people can take advantage of this. So act now to secure your spot. We are, in all seriousness, so excited to look at the new year. God has been doing a work in my life, giving me convictions on evangelism. And as I was thinking about what we were going to look at this week and what I wanted to read and comment on, Romans 1:16 came to mind, and I want to read that to everybody. We'll kind of start with that. Romans 1:16 and 17 says, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek. For in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith for faith. As it is written, the righteous shall live by faith." Now there is a lot in this two little verses that we could hone in on and talk about, and obviously the book of Romans has huge impact on our faith, and it's just kind of like a mini Bible is what many call it. But I want to really focus on this topic of being ashamed of the gospel, and to talk about that I want to give some context, right? So Paul in this is writing to the Romans. So the Romans are a Greek church, right? So there's Greeks there that he's writing to, and they are thriving in their faith. Their faith is got reputation that he knows. And in the first 15 verses, he wants to go visit them. He wants to encourage each other through faith, their faith encouraging him, encouraging through spiritual gifts and fellowship, basically. It's his desire, but he has not been able to make it there yet. Now, one of the interesting things that I see in this passage, earlier in the passage, Paul says that he is called to both the Greek and the barbarian. And one of the things that is common in Scripture is another comparison, and that is the Jew and the Gentile. And the interesting thing about this, and the reason that I bring it up, is that I think it's very important when we think about what Paul is trying to accomplish here. Like, Paul is evangelizing, and we think of in the evangelical or reformed or Pentecostal, more charismatic churches, we think of evangelism as sharing of the gospel to change a heart. And I've done some work with people in the Catholic Church and kind of going through and implementing software systems and stuff with them. And one of the cool things that I talked about with a Catholic friend of mine is, as they're looking at their discipleship programs and things that what we would call discipleship, they actually call them evangelism classes. And when I first heard this, I thought they were training people to go out and evangelize. But they use the term evangelize not just as a immediate first transform, accept the Lord, and okay, now they're evangelized, now we go into discipleship. They actually use evangelize as the term for discipleship as well. At least they did at this one parish. And I thought, what a cool thought. We are evangelizing each other, even after we accept the gospel. Because as Paul says in this passage, that he's not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first and then to the Greek. For in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith for faith, as it is written, the righteous shall live by faith. So the gospel that is shared with us, the evangelization process, is something that continues. We continue to evangelize ourselves. And this is where I feel this strong conviction is, I think because the church is so focused on discipleship often, that we kind of get ashamed of the gospel from an evangelism perspective. We get comfortable with our circles. I know I have. And I feel like the Lord has really told me in the last few years, he's just ignited in me a conviction that if I believe these things, I need to live these things, right? The righteous shall live by faith. If we're living by faith, we're going to share that faith. One of the things that I think as we dissect, are we ashamed of the gospel, that we need to consider is, what does that even mean? And how is that playing out on a day-to-day basis, right? Like we can say, like, no, I'm not ashamed of the gospel. It's the center of my life. It's what I build every day on. Well, if your relationship with Christ, if your processes with the gospel, your understanding of the gospel, has gotten to be so personal that it is private, then we have an issue, right? Because we should have a personal relationship with Jesus. But we want to have a personal relationship with Jesus that is like, oh, I know him, right? We have a personal relationship with Jesus that we're like, oh, yeah. I know him personally. We don't have a personal relationship with Jesus that's like, oh, no, that's personal. Like, I don't want to talk about it. And that's the problem we can have is how personal is your relationship with Jesus? And let's define that. Because if you have a personal relationship with Jesus that keeps you from sharing it with others, that's not the personal that he's talking about. That means that we're ashamed of the gospel. We're embarrassed by it. Or we're just prideful and we don't want to share it with anybody because we don't want to be bothered. And as I'm going through this and thinking about what are the things that have kept me from evangelizing people, and there was a couple of life experiences that kind of brought this to fruition. And this particular time when I really felt the conviction is I should share the Lord with this person. It was a stranger. We were in a parking lot. I was kind of helping him with putting something in a car. And I thought, I should really share Christ with him. And I didn't. And I got back in the car and I thought, why didn't I do that? And there were a couple of things that came to mind. One, my wife and my kids were in the car. I was busy. We had to get them home to get dinner and get them to bed and all this stuff. There was a part of me that didn't want to be bothered with the sacrifice of time on the chance that this guy would engage in a conversation. And I repented of that. And I said, Lord, please, forgive me for that. Just change my heart. But there's other things, right? So there's also nervousness, right? We just get nervous. We're afraid of being rejected, and that can make us feel like, I don't want to be rejected. I don't want to be called a fool. I don't want to be thought of as foolish. I don't want to be thought of as a conspiracy theorist or somebody who doesn't believe in science or whatever our cultural pushback would be. And those are battles against the world system, battles against our own flesh and our own desires, but also battles against the enemy. The enemy coming at us with these fiery darts telling us, you're going to be thought foolish. They're going to reject you. They're going to do these things. And I want to encourage you guys, if you're nervous about sharing the gospel because you're afraid of conflict, know that Christ has called you to conflict. And in order to be ready for conflict, we have to exercise our faith. So you don't have to go and start with open air preaching to the crowd, right? You don't have to go and do these things sitting next to somebody at the mechanic or at the doctor's office. Just start a conversation, right? Care about somebody enough to try to get to know them so that you can share the gospel with them. Don't be afraid of rejection because that's very you-centered. And Jesus tells us, right? And this is a great way to kind of get past this nervousness as well. And I think that it comes at another point, which is that we're often not confident enough to share the gospel, that we're ashamed because we're not ready, right? We're caught off guard. And this is something where I think one of my favorite baseball players of all time, Torrey Hunter, used to say when he was kind of bringing up Mike Trout was coming up the ranks. If you're not a baseball fan, you don't know who these people are, but if you are, you're like, yay, baseball. But Mike Trout was coming up in the ranks, and Torrey Hunter used to tell him, and they talked about this, that you need to visualize what's going to happen. If you don't have a plan, then you're going to fail, right? There's the old saying, if you fail to plan, you will then plan to fail, or something like that. And it's the same with evangelism. How would you share with someone? How would you share the gospel with someone? What question would you ask? What might you try to bring up? If you're not going into conversations with a plan, then you're going to plan to fail. And I think that's something that Jesus tells us often is we're called to a mission. We need to prepare for it. We need to exercise our faith. We need to rehearse the gospel in our own minds. And this can get to where we might have insecurity in our own faith because we don't know what to share because we really don't know why we believe. And you guys, I don't want to get all hung up in that you're saved by knowledge, because you're not. You're saved by the sacrifice that Christ made on the cross. Your knowledge does not save you, but your knowledge equips you. And the Bible tells us to take every thought captive. It tells us to seek wisdom. It tells us to have a fear of the Lord because that's the beginning of knowledge, it's the beginning of wisdom. There's nothing wrong with pursuing knowledge. But if the enemy can keep you from pursuing that knowledge, then you are not equipped to go out and live the purpose that God has given you, which is to expand the kingdom, to share his good news, to bring hope to others. All of this to say, this rant, what I want you guys to know is it is important for us to plan to share the gospel with people, both those who don't know the Lord and those who do. And one of the cool things that's going to happen, if you take this challenge for the new year, if you say, I am going to look not just hypothetically, but I'm going to plan and look for people that I can execute my gospel sharing plan with, then this is what's going to happen. One, you're going to be rejected. Be ready for it. Some people are going to say like, you're ridiculous, you're stupid. That's okay. What does the Bible tell us to do? Wipe the dust off your sandals, move on to the next. Don't feel insecure about that. Just be prepared for it. Know that this is an option. This could happen. You're not really losing a lot. Now, my wife says, for you introverts out there, this is a win-win. You can share the gospel with somebody. If they reject you, it's like, oh, now I don't even have to talk to them. So, keep that in mind. You extroverts, probably a little bit harder, but anyways. Two, the other thing that can happen, if you share the gospel to someone, they may already be Christian. I can tell you guys, as I've started to share the gospel with people that I come into contact with and engage in these conversations, look for ways to bring in a conversation about Christ, a conversation about God. I have been an encourager to others because what they find is that they are a believer, but they didn't think to engage in this way. And now it encourages them, I resonate with what you're saying to me. Like, I want to live more like this. And that's what our testimonies are for. So that's the second thing that could happen from you evangelizing and sharing with people that you meet and that you're coming into contact with, is you could be encouraging other believers. You could be the hands and feet of Christ to go and encourage others to live out this mission as well. And then the third thing that could happen is someone could come to know the Lord. You could get to heaven and you could be the instrument that God used to change someone's heart, to bring the truth to them and to be there in that moment. I mean, how amazing would that be to get up to heaven and feel like, man, this person is here because the Lord used me to share his truth with them. So these are just paths that we need to prepare for. And as Tory Hunter said, you need to have a plan in order to have success. So I encourage you guys, think through this. We're going to be releasing more things on this. This is just something that's important to me, and I feel like I want to kind of dig into. We're going to have more videos and just look at this from different angles as we think about how do we live in a digital world as a Christian. That's what I have for you guys today. Please like, share, subscribe this video. Send it to somebody that you think it would be an encouragement to. Send it to somebody you think it might be a challenge to. Help us launch just a movement of evangelism with all of the other people that are doing this. Ray Comfort has great resources. We've done some stuff with him, and great videos to watch to see how he incorporates in the gospel. I hope that your church has some evangelism resources that you could go to as well. Maybe share this with your pastor and say, hey, I really want to do this. What can we do to equip ourselves? God bless you guys. I pray that your New Year's is great, that you are continued to be transformed by the Lord, and that we see you in the next video.